whether maybe there's a generational difference, but what have you seen when people show up for interviews?
So with millennials, I would see them come in very casual, as if, they're walking in with the assumption that I've got this job. They need me. I'm of course they're going to hire me. I'm the greatest, right? And so they show up. I even had one of them show up wearing a T-shirt of my competitor to an interview.
No.
And I was like, I was like, are you serious?
Yes. This is the Brandon Smith Show, and I'm your host, Brandon Smith, and the entire purpose of this show is one singular thing, and that is to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So today, our topic is all about dysfunction and curing it, particularly around the idea of motivation. And we're going to talk more specifically of how do you motivate younger workforce. I mean, I heard this issue come up this week with a client organization I was working with, and they said, yeah, we're getting all these younger workers in here, and it's different. We're not sure how to do it. So to help us on this journey, I've got an awesome guest, Craig Sears. Craig, how are you, man?
Hey, Brandon, I'm pretty good. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. I'm really excited because I think you've got a particularly good perspective on this.
I do. I have a pretty good perspective. I don't know if I've got all the answers, but I do have a good perspective.
Yeah. So to share with everyone your role, you're president of Sears Pool Management Consultants.
Correct.
And so you employ lifeguards.
I do.
Every summer.
Every summer.
And one of my guests on this show, who I happen to have a fond connection with, my daughter, Abby,
right,
it has been one of your lifeguards.
Yes.
And so every year...
She does a good job.
I'm glad to hear that. She told me today she's running low on cash.
Right.
It's too bad it's the winter.
Right.
I said, Abby, you're a little bit out of luck.
Well, she can come help us in the office for a day or two.
She might need that. Yeah. So every summer, you've got to go through that hard, kind of tedious process of screening high schoolers and college kids and then bringing them in and then training them and keeping them motivated and engaged because they represent your company.
Right.
Man,
exactly.
That is hard.
It is.
So before we jump into this topic of what you've learned, because I'm really curious, I got lots of questions for you on both millennial and now Gen Z and the different generations, but still kind of keeping them motivated. I always like to start with story time. So catch our listeners up a little bit to speed on how did you get into this business? What was that kind of that trigger point for you, and where do you see it going? And then we'll talk more about kind of the motivating part.
Okay. So I got in this business, I'll call it a fortunate accident. Basically, I grew up always at the pool. I was a pool rat. I was swimming. I was on swim team. My only summer jobs for high school and college were lifeguarding, swim coaching, swim lessons. Loved it. Couldn't stand to be away from the water. I graduated college and I figured, okay, it's time to get a real job. So I got a real job. I wasn't that enthused with it. It was okay. And then my community that I'd managed the pool for the last 4 years prior to that came back to me, and they couldn't find somebody to manage the pool after me. They hired somebody else, did not have such a good experience, and they said, can you come back? And first I thought, well, maybe I'll just do this as a side gig and I can make some extra money. So I did it that first summer. I kind of enjoyed it, and then I ended up picking up 8 more clients by the second summer.
Wow. Just word of mouth?
Just word of mouth. And at that point I had quit. At that point, at the end of my second summer, I decided I'm going to quit my regular job, and I think I want to do this as a career. And I went back to school. I got my MBA at Georgia State in management because I figured my undergrad was in biology, and if I'm going to start a business, I got to get some business skills. Science is great and all, and I had my chemistry on the pool down pat. That part, that part was solid, but business skills I was lacking. So I went back and got my MBA. And that was huge. If I hadn't done that, I would not have been able to grow the business. And so it just kind of went from there. And I saw after only 2 years of what started as an experiment that I could turn this into a life, for me, and maybe even provide for a family. And now, that's 22 years later, I'm still doing this, and I wouldn't do anything else. I can't imagine doing anything else.
So on average, how many pools a year would you manage?
So we have roughly around 200 clients. Those are typically HOAs and condos and private clubs and health clubs and whatnot around the Atlanta area. And about 70 of those we provide staff for, and the rest of them we just do maintenance and chemicals on.
Okay. So 200 your pools you're taking care of, and then 70 of them you're staffing,
right?
With lifeguards.
Right. It's what we call our full management package, basically, where we're doing full management with the staffing. And sometimes it's lifeguards, sometimes it's pool attendants, which is something that we've seen a rise in recent years. Since around the time of the recession, we've had more requests for attendants versus lifeguard. It's a different role. It's more about controlling access to the facility, because during the recession, there's a lot of people not paying their HOA dues, and the homeowners associations had to tighten up and say, we got to control this. We got to prevent people from getting in and using the facilities, and that way they'll pay their dues.
Okay, so the person isn't a lifeguard, but they're more like a bouncer.
Pool bouncer.
Guard.
Yeah, right.
Bouncer. I want that job. I'm retiring to become a pool bouncer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know who I would scare. I don't know. I'm not very intimidating.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, wow. Okay. Well, I'm actually really interested in kind of the business side of this, because I think that, so many people I know listening to this have aspirations of starting their own business. And I think it's neat to show flavors of that.
Mm-hmm.
And even how can you create a small business or medium-sized business that's even in your community and kind of serve a local community, and in some ways can be semi-recession proof. I mean, when there's an ongoing need, I mean, people need lifeguards, they need their pools maintained, even when there's recessions. And it's interesting how the need changes. Like we need a bouncer, because we got free riders coming, and so you've got to figure out how you staff that.
Right. And I wouldn't say that my business model is recession proof, but it's recession resistant. We still felt the squeeze like everybody else, but it's a needed service. And that's kind of part, if anybody's looking to become an entrepreneur, I would say, first find something that you're excited about, something that you're passionate about, and then make sure you are good at it, or you know how to get good at it. I think a lot of what we see on TV, I'll just reference these, talent shows like American Idol or America's Got Talent.
Yeah.
You see people getting on there and they're like, well, I've always dreamed of being a singer or a performer or this or that. And they get up there and you're just, have you seen yourself in the mirror? Do you know? So there's just, you've got to be realistic. And I think to do that, you've got to have a strong sense of self-awareness. So you need to spend some time with yourself. You need to know what's really important to you. And get to know what you're good at. And if it's something that's important to you and you're good at it, or you believe that you can get good at it, then pursue that. But, my dad used to say all the time, you can't teach tall in basketball. There are certain things that you can't change, about you. So it doesn't mean you can't play basketball. I mean, Spuds McKenzie was a great basketball player, right? You're just not going to dunk all the time.
Yeah.
But there's other ways to get to the basket. So that's the thing, is you got to get to know yourself first. And that's what I try to tell the younger generations, is to encourage them, because I think a lot of times they've been sold this, for lack of a better term, lie that you can do anything you want. All you got to do is go to college, you graduate college, and when you get out of college, the world will be waiting for you with, this golden piece of paper for you to sign with your dream job, and you get to do exactly what you want.
Well, I mean,
there's nothing that stinks about your job.
It doesn't work that way?
It doesn't work that way, But but a lot of millennials have been raised to believe that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they're, when people first started talking about millennials, everybody blamed them and said, well, gosh, this generation is so lazy and everything. Well, really, it came from how they were raised. I mean, it's just as much the parentals and the society's fault as it is theirs. I totally agree with you. And I think that this is a whole other topic and conversation, from the perspective of what we value when we are raising our kids, because I do think we overemphasize and overvalue practice. Yeah. And college is practice. Yeah.
Sports activities, volunteer activities in high school and college, it's all practice. It's not real. It's not real. You're not in the game. Right. No one's paying you to do any of that.
Right.
And so people think, oh, no, it's practice. I know plenty of people who are great in practice and they couldn't play well in the game.
Yeah.
Great college degrees and can't do the life thing well.
Right.
And then I know lots of people who didn't do well in practice, and then they thrive when the game time starts. Most entrepreneurs, had you and I are a little different in that space, but most entrepreneurs had some form of dyslexia, had C averages, and they go on to, they had to figure out other ways to make it work because they couldn't do practice.
Yep.
Anyway, whole other topic, but nice segue into this topic of how do you motivate this younger generation? So you've had now two different kind of flavors of younger generation. You've had kind of millennials. Maybe even since it's been 22 years in this role, you've had kind of Gen X, then you've had mostly millennials,
right,
and then now you're getting Gen Z. So you're getting kind of different.
You're dead on. Yeah, when I started, I was hiring my friends. I'm Gen X. I think you're Gen X, and I'd hire all my friends, and they'd come work for me, and I didn't have to, I knew what their work ethic was because it was the same as mine, and I knew that they were, it was kind of work hard, party hard, right? That's the Gen X mentality, right? But I shouldn't say the new, because now Gen Z is starting to come into the workforce, but and that's what we're just starting to see creep in, because I feel like I'm on the front end of this because I'm hiring at 15. I'm hiring kids at their first opportunity for a job, and millennials and Gen Z are, there's obviously some overlap, a little bit of blur there, but from what I'm seeing from the first examples of Gen Z that are entering our doors is a little bit different than millennials. Millennials, as I was saying before, have this expectation that things are kind of going to be laid out for them, and they're going to be it's going to be made easy for them, and they're going to succeed easily. So and the next generation Gen Z is raised, I think, more with older with maybe the Gen X mindset of I've got to figure this out, and I've got to figure out what I'm going to do. So that's a very different mentality. I think we're starting to see just in the way that kids dress when they come in for an interview.
Really?
Yes, that has been a major change.
So let's just talk about that one for a minute, and then I know we're getting close to break, so we can kind of, I'd love to get a deeper dive into that. So if you're thinking about whether maybe there's a generational difference, but what have you seen when people show up for interviews? So
with millennials, I would see them come in very casual, as if, they're walking in with the assumption that I've got this job, they need me. I'm of course they're going to hire me. I'm the greatest, right? And so they show up. I even had one of them show up wearing a T-shirt of my competitor to an interview.
No.
And I was like, I was like,
yes,
are you serious?
Yes.
Are you serious right now?
That is a incredibly glorious fail.
Right. So
that's going in, since we're in Atlanta, going into the big Coca-Cola building, interview for a job, wearing a Pepsi t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That doesn't happen now.
That's
So awesome. Now I see these kids come in. Some of them are even wearing suit and tie or dress, and really trying to make themselves look presentable.
Interesting.
And really asking engaging questions, whereas the millennials would kind of sit there and wait for us to engage them and wait for us to kind of, tell them here's what it's going to be like when you're, when you're working, and here's how the work environment is, and we're kind of having to sell them on the job as opposed to the newer generation is coming in a little more eager.
It's interesting. I can't speak to the newer generation other than I'm raising a bunch of them. But it does seem like the description you laid out, at least for the millennial candidates, was more of a volunteer orientation. Like I'm showing up as a volunteer to this organization, and so I can kind of dress any way I want, and they're gonna sell me on the organization because I'm a volunteer,
right?
And the power rests with me, versus rests with the boss who's paying me,
right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh. Okay. Wow. Wow. That's really fascinating. So you've seen that change. Now, the other thing I would be curious about is, generations, it's unfair to say everyone's like this, because there's always differences.
There's always exceptions.
And there's also tends to be more of my experience has been kind of a core of the generation. Like, if you bleed on either end, it's going to be like, the early millennials probably felt a little more Gen X.
Right.
And the more tail of the millennials might feel a little more Gen Z.
Right.
Versus the kind of the core middle. All right, so when we come back from break, I want to talk to you a little bit more about what you learned, best practices for motivating folks.
Sure,
because you got to send these folks out,
yep.
and
they're representing
representing
name.
you. Your name is, I'm looking at your shirt. Your name is on your shirt.
That's
your
right.
name is on their shirt.
That's right.
And hopefully not the competitors.
Hopefully not the competitors. Exactly.
All right. So stay tuned. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk more about how do you motivate younger workforce. Hey, this is Brandon with your coaching minute for the week. So one of the very simple tips that I give my clients that I find to be extremely helpful and beneficial with their direct reports, so for those manager clients of mine, is to do this. So at some point in the year, often about halfway between the time you give the performance review and the next performance review, so that 6-month mark, during your one-on-ones with your direct reports, at the end of the one-on-ones, I want you to ask your direct reports the start, stop, continue question. So in other words, you ask them this: what can I start doing to support you better? What can I stop doing that's getting in your way? And what can I continue doing that will help support you more? And what they come back to me and tell me is they say, oh my gosh, it was so amazing to hear not only the feedback, but how different each of my direct reports are and what they need from me. So think about a time this year when you can do that. Now, one more important thing around this tip: make sure you let your direct reports know that you're going to do that so they can think and prepare prior to that meeting. I promise you'll not only feel better, but you'll thank me for doing that. So that is your coaching minute for the week. I look forward to hearing how it goes. Welcome back from break. Of course, this is the Brandon Smith Show, and we are talking today about motivation and motivating younger generation and younger workforce. So Craig, when we left off, you were talking about some of the differences between even just interviewing, what
Yes.
you notice and
Yep.
kind of some of the differences. So let's now talk about motivation. So what are some things that you've learned? And we'll start with millennials. So when you've kind of learned, I've got to kind of keep these people motivated, focused, because as we said before, I mean, they are literally wearing your name on their shirts.
Exactly.
And they're representing you and your business. And you're not, what also makes it really interesting in this role that you've got, is you're not watching them every day.
No,
You're
the
trusting
leeway.
them to
Yeah.
go do a good job. And
Right.
there's no
We're
like,
trusting their judgment.
there's not like, well, we'll have a meeting in an hour to talk about it. No, there's none of that. You may not see them at all summer, other than when they come to the office for training or whatever.
Right.
So
So we
how-
check on them periodically, but they may have a 6-hour shift, and we only check on them 2 or 3 times a week, so that we may or may not hit them on their shift.
So how do you manage in that environment? What have you learned?
So, money is always looked at as the first easy go-to motivator, and so that's one of the things when we started back in the late '90s with the big tech boom, things were going nuts, and so we started increasing pay, and that was effective. But as we got deeper into the millennial generation, pay became less and less of a motivating factor, to the point where it really is almost meaningless to a large percentage of them. There's still like you said before, I don't want to group everybody in there. There's still a percentage of millennials that are still money motivated, and they're interested in maximizing their earning potential. But that percentage has shrunk of that generation, as we gotten more into the workforce. So I had to figure out what else can we do. And a couple years ago, about 2-3 years ago, I found this website called the Heroic Imagination Project. It's put together by Dr. Phil Zimbardo. I don't know if you are familiar with his name.
I know.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's a controversial
Prison experiment.
Prison experiment, exactly. Yes, he's a very controversial figure. He does psychological studies on good and evil and things like that, and he's kind of out there with some of his stuff. But if you take a look at what he's putting forth on this, is he's really trying to study heroism and what makes people heroic and what makes them decide to take heroic action. And then how do we encourage that in our society and in the workplace?
That's cool. I like that idea.
And so I've really enjoyed kind of
Heroic
Imagination Project.
Heroic Imagination Project.
Right.
Okay. Heroic Imagination Project.
And so by, just what he's got a TED Talk out there. So do you, I know. in it is, well, there's a lot of good material in there, but after watching it, I kind of came up with, it's an easy parallel to my business. So we have a slogan for our guards. It's be an everyday hero. And it's kind of easily adaptable to what I do, because as a lifeguard, you're out there to preserve lives, keep people safe. And my goal there is to motivate them to action, because a lot of times, like what you said earlier, millennials sometimes feel like this is just a volunteer job, and they're just showing up, and they'll, if something happens, okay, they'll respond. But we're trying to motivate proactive lifeguarding, just like in other workplaces. You want proactive action. You want people to think about the problem before it happens and prevent it from happening. We want them to think about the injury that could happen if they don't stop this behavior or correct this this problem patron at the pool. So trying to get them to embody being an everyday hero, and getting them to understand that being an everyday hero doesn't mean you actually physically get in the water, complete a rescue, have to do CPR on somebody or first aid. That's all heroic. But just stopping Susie from, pushing Billy off the diving board is heroic too. Stopping Johnny from doing a backflip off the side and cracking his skull on the side of the pool, that's heroic. So getting them to kind of see themselves as everyday heroes taps into that feeling that they were raised with, that, I'm special and I deserve, attention, and I deserve awards for what I'm doing, and it kind of taps into that a little bit, and reinforces that, hey, I am here for an important reason. I am contributing to what the company is doing here, and I'm part of the culture. And so I think that can be adapted to other companies. I think you just have to look for in what ways can you lay out their job description and explain that this is heroic, this is important when you do these things.
I think you've hit something really important that most companies struggle with. So all the research around, if we just look at the millennial generation, they say one of the big motivators is meaning and purpose.
Exactly.
Feeling a sense of meaning and purpose. So I think what companies try and do is they go back and they say, well, we need to have a big grandiose purpose statement or meaning statement for us as a company that millennials will attach to, or a younger workforce will attach to. And while I think that's true, it's really hard to do.
It is.
What you've done is you've said, I'm going to create meaning and purpose in their particular role and job, how I want them to operate, versus, Sears Pool Management Consultants, this is our big grandiose purpose. That may or may not resonate, but you're saying, for you, I want you to be an everyday hero.
Exactly.
And what does that look like? That's really cool.
Yep.
You made it very personalized for them.
Right.
Wow. Brilliant.
Right.
And mind blown. I'm going off and sharing this. This is fantastic.
Please do.
Because I think that is a great takeaway for everyone listening right now who has a younger workforce. How do you create a quote unquote purpose statement that is at the individual level? Like for example, be an everyday hero.
Be an everyday hero.
I love that.
Yeah. And part of that also is for them to have the encouragement to be an everyday hero, to take that step. You have to kind of remove the fear of failure a little bit. And I do that by telling them that, look, if you jump in the pool and you go rescue somebody and they didn't need rescuing, you're afraid of them being embarrassed, right? You're afraid of looking stupid, right? Just like in a job, if you do, you step out and you do something thinking you're helping and you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't do that because what if it turns bad? Right? I can't deal with that. I can't deal with that disappointment or that shame or whatnot. So we say, no, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And the customers are going, because this blows their mind. If you get in, you have to rescue somebody and they don't need rescuing, the customers are going to applaud that. They're going to be thrilled because it shows you were paying attention and you were caring for that person who was in need. And that's what we're paid. I mean, that's what our job is. That's what our role is. So getting them to realize that that's not an embarrassing moment, that's a good moment. And if you have a kid that's fake drowning, okay, that's a problem. They need to sit out. That's not cool.
Right.
And that's a disciplinary issue, and we discussed that as well. But breaking that barrier, another slogan that we say is, if you don't know, go. And what we're talking about there is when you're surveying the pool, and because drowning is a tricky thing, and we could do a whole other show on that, but the signs of drowning are not as obvious as you would think. And so there's always a moment of doubt in your mind when you spot somebody who may or may not be drowning. Well, do I go? Do I not go? So our slogan there is, if you don't know, go. And we got that from Dr. Tom Griffiths, who's a an expert in the field. But basically that gives them something, a mantra to think about in their head, like, oh yeah, if I don't know, I better go. I just better do it, and not think about it. Just, I need to do this. This is
so
my,
what you're
this is my duty.
also, I'm also hearing, I'm using my words, kind of what
Yeah.
I think I'm hearing in all this is one of the things that if you could wave a magic wand and give them more of is more sense of ownership
Yep.
and initiative
Yes.
versus waiting back and being reactive and waiting to be told what to do.
Right.
And so you've put in place mantras and tried to remove some of the potential obstacles to that. So
Right.
they have a sense of ownership, initiative, that maybe you weren't seeing as much as you would have liked. So you've created ways to kind of get that in them.
Correct.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I call it the psychology of lifeguarding.
Oh, I know. I think absolutely. I mean, because you've got to get them all operating. You're setting a culture. You've got to get them all operating. I've often heard people describe culture as what happens when you're not around.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got 70 pools that you're not around because there's only one of you. And there's 70 pools. So you've got to create a culture so they're all operating the way that you need them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing it with a young workforce. So
Right.
any other tips you would have for us in terms of motivating young workforce?
As we move into Gen Z, I think they are starting to get a little more money motivated. And I do feel like that money is starting to become a little bit more of the equation, back in the equation again, which I think is a good thing. I think philosophically speaking, I think wages have been suppressed for too long, and they need to be raised. And if you take a look at what we're paying people that are doing lifeguarding jobs, it's a mission critical job. It's an important job. I mean, they're getting the same or maybe a little bit more than somebody that's working in fast food.
Yeah.
And that needs to change. So, I'm trying to push the envelope on that. And as far as opening the public's eyes to this being an important job, and then also opening our young people's eyes to looking at other opportunities outside the normal scope of things. I'm a big fan of Mike Rowe, for instance, Dirty Jobs guy. The long-term outlook in the U.S. that I see for job growth and is in the service industry, and because it's the jobs that people are kind of thumbing their nose at now, that are, and we don't have enough people in those jobs. Those service industries are starving for labor, and the people that go into those jobs are and stay with it and make a commitment are going to be very successful. So I try to encourage young folks that, you don't have to be successful. You don't have to go to college. I mean, I went to college, but it doesn't, you can find something that you're good at. You can learn about it, find that it's something that is a need and grow with it. I mean, there's just so much growth in the service industry. It's going to be phenomenal. And anything that, let me clarify that by saying anything that's not, can't be automated easily.
Yeah.
Like you see, the ordering machines at McDonald's, they're replacing cashiers with touch screens. Okay, that's not a job to go into. But lifeguarding, they have, there are some neat advancements in the field, but they're not going to create lifeguard robots anytime soon.
Yeah.
Electricians and plumbers and welders and
mechanics.
All these skilled trades that really, really need people.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. I mean, and that's why I think that those jobs are actually more protected from a lot of technological.
Yeah, we're always going to need those jobs
because they are, and they're at the community level.
Yep.
I think that's
exactly.
Yeah. And AI is not gonna. It's gonna take a long time till AI gets in there.
Yep.
And it involves just a lot of human judgment and empathy and all those kinds of things, which are hard to replicate. Particularly the soft skill stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Super cool. All right. So I know we're getting close to the end here. This has been fantastic. And one more thing I would say, I think it's so awesome that you are part of helping young generation learn how to work. We don't value that enough. We overvalue volunteer activities. We overvalue classes. We overvalue sporting activities.
Yep.
None of that. That's why, there's such a lack of maturity in the workforce, because people aren't working till they're 23 rather than 15, like when you and I started. So they're 8 years behind, and so
absolutely right. Hit the nail on the head.
I saw a study that in the mid 90s, 70% of high school kids had part-time jobs in the summer or during the school year. Today, it's 35%.
Yeah, that's exactly what's
So
happening.
so 2 out of 3 kids don't work until they graduate from college, and that's
Yep. And it's many of our customers that are our generation and older are looking at me in my industry and saying, I used to be a lifeguard. That's a great job. What do you mean you can't find enough kids to lifeguard? That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's exactly what's happening. The work has been undervalued, and all these experiences and volunteerism and other things that are great have been placed on a higher pedestal. And we're forgetting that we're not teaching our kids the basic skills that they need to succeed in the world when they move out from under our roof.
And I know that's a parenting philosophy. Some people listening to this may disagree, but I would strongly encourage everyone listening, if you've got a kid, to think about how can I get them a job. It may not show up great on a college resume, application, but it will help them build character better than anything else.
I think it does. I mean, lifeguarding in particular shows up great on a college resume because it shows responsibility. It shows physical prowess and ability to make judgment calls because you're out there by yourself a lot of times. So
helps you get into college too.
Yeah.
Win, win, win. And they make some money.
Right.
And they get to pay for their own stuff.
Right.
So I ask all my guests this question
Sure.
when we get close to the end here. What's one life hack you might have for us to help us live a life that much more free from dysfunction? It can be personal, it can be professional.
So this is kind of a bit of both, I guess, but it's probably maybe a little more professional. But lead with empathy and kindness is what I would say. First, we have to take a look at every situation, whether it's in the workplace or in the home, and really try to understand what the other person is experiencing and really see it from their standpoint. And then at that point, we can proceed with a kind decision, or how to move forward. And by kindness, I don't mean just getting rolled over. That's not what I mean at all. You've got to be kind to yourself and kind to them, and that means holding yourself and them accountable. So I tell this to my lifeguards as well. When you are at the pool, this is your domain, right? And so you are to be kind. Being kind is enforcing the rules. You're preventing people from hurting themselves, right? Being kind is not letting Johnny jump on Susie because it's funny or whatnot. That's not being kind. So being kind is taking responsibility for yourself and holding others accountable for taking responsibility for themselves.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of twist on what kindness is sometimes.
I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking it's that difference between nice and kind.
Yeah.
And you've kind of elevated it. Kind means we're going to do some things that are tough, but they're the right things for the person.
Right.
And that's showing kindness.
Right.
Fantastic. Man, this was great. So if people want to learn more about you, what you're up to, where can they go?
So you can go to my Facebook page for my company, Sears Pool Management Consultants. You can also, I have
Sears Pool Management Consultants. And Sears is spelled S-E-A-R-S.
Just like the business, but my last name not related to Sears and Roebuck. And I also have.
I think your business has got a little more of a future than they do these days.
Yes, for sure. Don't get me started on that. I have another Facebook page called the Greater Atlanta Water Safety Alliance, which is a nonprofit that I started back in 2012, which is water safety education, which is another big passion of mine. So that's another way to kind of keep up with me and our activities.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. This was fantastic. And I could totally see us doing this again. Particularly we get close to the summertime. We start talking about water safety and other things we can be doing.
There's lots of things we can talk about.
I absolutely agree. And thank you for listening and watching the show. Catch a new show each Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on iTunes.thebrandonsmithshow.com and live on Facebook.com/Brandon Smith WPT for a workplace therapist. And if you've enjoyed today's show, and we certainly hope you have, please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. So until our next show, have a good week, a great week, and an awesome life.